So, I want to talk about firelighting. Now, when I did my practical training, I've been very honest in the past and said that my practical training was the training that I did was very conveyor belt. And what I mean by that is that the course that I was on felt very like, here's the thing, I've shown it to you, you had 10 minutes to do it, now we move on. Next way. Here's the thing, I've shown you how to do it, 10 minutes to practice, move on. The time for embedding it just wasn't there. But with firelighting, one of the things that really struck me was there's a parallel between firelighting and what I used to find when I did a music degree. So I did a lot of performances, and anyone that's done performances and learned a particular piece, some of the pieces that you learn, particularly in like classical music, can be quite long, and it can be very tempting. I promise this metaphor will make sense in a minute. You can end up with pieces, and I know I had pieces of music like this, where I could play the first 6 bars so unbelievably well, and there was like a linear line from great downwards as the piece went on, because I didn't know about segmenting out the practice. And so what I would do is every time I wanted to practice, I would start at bar 1 and I would go, okay, maybe I got to bar 8 confidently. Okay, let me check out bar 9. Right, back to the start. Right, that's the one that I'm doing. And so what that meant is bars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're getting so much repetition, so much practice that as you go further in the piece, it's just less and less time that I've practiced it. And that's kind of how I feel about my firelighting learning. I spent so long practicing the like sparking, practicing the like fluffing up the cotton wool, practicing the, doing whatever else involved in, that initial starting, right? But as someone that is now running long-term sessions and running sessions that run for a few hours, more importantly, that I've run this training, for a few years now, people end up in that same situation where they are pretty good at sparking a ferro rod. They are pretty good at fluffing up some cotton wool. They are quite often the least practiced at keeping a fire going. And that's actually the skill that you need for 80% of the session. Like, you need to, in an ideal situation, you spark it once, then you've got 90 minutes of keeping that going, or however long you need that fire on for. And the amount of times that I see people stuff their fires up or create smoky fires or do things, because that's the bit they've practiced the least. They've practiced the lighting over and over and over and over again. And so that's great. And especially then it compounds, because if you don't practice keeping a fire going, then those fires go out. And so what do? You spark them up again. And so you go from bar 1 again, and you're going through and through and through, and then the fire goes out because you haven't practiced keeping it going. So the hack that I'm going to give you here is to start backwards with everything that you can to help you out, and then move back. So, and what I mean by that is, when you're lighting fires for a while, I would absolutely encourage you to use all or any of these things: cotton wool, Vaseline, wood wool firelighters. Look, maybe they're not the best in the world for long-term use, but chemical firelighters. I would encourage you to be using like those pre-made bricks of newspaper, those things that like keep your fire going very easily. And get practiced at the last bit. Get practiced at keeping a fire going and doing all that stuff. So using all those tools means that we're just making the first bit easier, because we want to practice. I think it's more beneficial to practice keeping that fire going, then move slowly backwards. So now maybe you're still using cotton wool, wood wool, and all those other bits, but maybe now you're using like kindling that you have cut. Do you know what I mean? So you're there and you're taking a bit and you're just moving, rather than from the front forwards, rather than from bar 1 and starting there every time. We'll be starting with like the prep of keeping a fire going. So you're great at keeping a fire going. Okay, give yourself a tiny bit more challenge today. So you can still use the ferro rod, you can still use the cotton wool, you can still use like Vaseline, but maybe you don't use a wood wool lighter today. And you try that and you work backwards until you get to just a ferro rod and some curled up birch bark, and you light the fire that way. I think that's a way more successful way to practice that firelighting skill than just starting at bar 1, striking a cotton wool, and then it goes. Okay, strike the cotton wool, there it goes. I think starting at the end and working backwards would have made my firelighting experience not only more successful, but way more fun, because I would have been not so worried about it during the sessions. The amount of emotional stress that I've gone through in sessions trying to keep fires going so that I can get enough hot water for hot chocolate, or I told everybody I'd cook pancakes, or all those things. And the reason that I was panicking is because that's the bit I hadn't practiced. I wasn't good at keeping a fire going or controlling how big and small it was. I was great. I was absolutely great at doing sparks onto cotton wool, but that's not what the skill was that I needed. So number three hack is going to be starting your fire backwards. Prep from a lit fire backwards.